Anyway.
All right. We're going to an atheist caller now. Mitchell in Sunnyvale, California.
Hi there.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good.
All right.
How are you?
Good. So I want to talk about why Richard Dawkins is wrong about religion.
Okay.
So one of the things he says early on in the God Delusion is that, yeah, he's trying to disprove that God exists, right? Did I say that right?
No, he's not.
He proves that God doesn't exist.
No, he's not trying to do. Have you actually read The God Delusion?
Yeah, I mean, he says almost the opposite.
Yeah.
What does he say?
He says that, I mean, I'm pretty sure he says there's no way to prove for certain that a God who doesn't want to be found doesn't exist. Yeah. And he also brings up that spectrum where he says, you know, if you rank people from 1 to 7, where 1 is absolutely certain that God exists and 7 is absolutely certain that God doesn't exist, I would be like a 6.9, I seem to recall. So, I mean, I think that Richard Dawkins would object to you characterizing him as saying that he thinks it's proven.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but I think his position is that it's really not his job to prove that a God doesn't exist.
That's fine.
Sure.
And that's not what I just wanted to sort of establish that. And that's fine. You can go that route. No problem with that. One of the ways he does it is he says, he is arguing a little bit about, you know, his 6.9 position where he says, who designed the designer? He does say that in God Delusion. And that's one of the ways he argues that there's no evidence for God, which is, I agree with. But it's really where he stops arguing about whether God exists or not, and he starts to talk about, a little bit later, why people have religion. And he's talking about priests manipulating the gullible, stuff like that. But he sort of doesn't follow, well, there's a couple different points, but the first one is about who designed the designer. He sort of says, well, a priest just happened, or a shaman just happened to have this idea that he could manipulate his flock, if you will, by, you know, talking about this thing called God, and that they'd all fall in line for various reasons, or whatever reasons he says. But he sort of forgets about who designed the designer. He's sort of just dropping this idea that some priest just came up with it out of the clear blue sky and started to get people to respond to that.
Okay.
If people, it doesn't make any sense that they would respond. I mean, from our point of view as atheists, we'd say, what are you talking about, priest? It's ridiculous. God, something that's out there in the blue that you can't see? The point is, there has to be a predisposition in people to have this belief. It isn't that the priest just suddenly decided that this was a way to manipulate people. It had to, the religion part of it, the belief in God part of it, had to pre-exist to have any leverage in the first place.
Well, I mean, yes, humans are pattern-seeking creatures, and so we tend to attribute a cause to things, and sometimes we make a mistake, and we attribute a cause when there really isn't, or we misattribute a cause to something. And if you were interested in manipulating that tendency in humans, religion is a good way to do that. And I mean,
that's right, but it only because it exists in the first place.
I don't think I personally wouldn't go so far as to say that religion is a predisposition. I would say instead that people are gullible generally, like including me.
I mean, yeah, I mean we are easily misled, especially when someone provides what seems to be a very neat explanation for some event.
And especially when that person projects an extreme amount of confidence or certainty in something they have no way of being sure about.
Right. And if the event inspires fear or loathing or some strong emotion in people, I think it gets even easier for someone to manipulate that.
Well, again, all I can say is that it falls back to the idea that you can't manipulate somebody regardless of their predispositions for cause and effect, that this invisible thing out in the sky somewhere in the heavens is a legitimate way to look at it, to assign cause.
You can totally
Clearly
manipulate people for plenty of reasons. They don't have to already believe something for you to convince them of it.
So you don't think this idea, who designed the designer, he doesn't have the same obligation to use that logic in his own argument about why people have religion. That
he does use that logic sometimes, but I mean, sitting in the chair of an atheist show that I've been hosting off and on for years and years, I can say there's not just one argument that you should be married to as the silver bullet that will fix people's religions. There are lots of different arguments, and you can't run them all simultaneously. You have to pick whichever one is the best one for the situation. And look, I am not a guy who thinks that Richard Dawkins is beyond all criticism.
Right.
I think you should be able to criticize anybody and have a discussion about individual things they say, but I'm not sure that you've caught Richard Dawkins on something specifically wrong that he said in this case.
Yeah.
All right, well, I have one other idea that I'd like to run by you.
Okay, but make it
So
quick.
he says, okay. He says, Darwinian selection habitually targets and eliminates waste. Nature is a miserly accountant, grudging the pennies, watching the clock, punishing the smallest extravagance. So my concern there is that he says, essentially, evolution doesn't tolerate wasteful stuff. And yet he's talking about this weird behavior that people have about believing in God and all the behaviors of religion, which is a very expensive, involved set of behaviors. So where's the punishing the smallest extravagance?
Well, I would say that some of the behaviors that religion encourages would not necessarily be regarded as wasteful depending on the environment. So, for example, there's actually a paper that was published in Science magazine several years ago that concerned what kinds of societies produce morally concerned gods, because there are all kinds of different manifestations of gods in all cultures all over the world, but what kinds of cultures produce gods that are concerned about a human's sort of moral behavior? And what they found was that it's only environments where resources are constrained where we see morally concerned gods. So in an environment like that, for someone to come into the group and basically not contribute anything, that would be very detrimental to the group. And so this sets up an us versus them. And in order to be part of the group, you have to follow certain rules. So one of those rules might include tithing to, the priests who basically set the rules. The other one might be that there is always this entity watching over you all the time, and if you break one of the rules, like if you steal food or, violate some kind of rule within the group, that's a sin, and that's punished by whatever the religion prescribes. But yeah, I mean, this idea that you can't be a freeloader because somebody's watching you all the time, that might be, very beneficial to somebody's survival in a resource-constrained area.
Right.
What you're saying is that there's a potentially beneficial purpose. That it's
I wouldn't use the word purpose.
Evolutionary term.
I wouldn't use the word purpose, but I would say that sometimes religion happens to be beneficial in the sense that it doesn't kill you and it maybe helps you survive in certain situations. There are there are traits that I wouldn't consider necessarily good in people, like, for instance, violent, aggressive behavior, for instance, might be bad for society as a whole, but if it makes you, kill somebody who's a rival for
for limited resources, that happens to be adaptive, even though we find it morally inappropriate.
Right.
And,
so
you know, the ways of
that.
getting along in a complicated society are kind of difficult to nail down, which is why a lot of times I'm skeptical about things like evolutionary psychology, which kind of gives pithy answers to, you know, the question of why we behave in a certain way. But so I wouldn't presume to explain exactly why religion exists and continues to exist. But I would say, you know, it's a little too glib to just say that religion is always bad for you in the long-term survival sense. I happen to think that believing stuff that isn't true is bad for your psyche in a lot of ways.
Well, right. But at the same time, the fact that it does exist and has existed for so long suggests that there has to be some kind of adaptive reason that it continues to persist.
Maybe,
and that
but
Richard
maybe it's just a
saying,
shit happens kind of side effect. I mean, remember that people have only been like literate for a few thousand years, which is an eye blink, and it's hard to get real specific about how evolution influences a population in such a short period of time, which a lot of biologists would say isn't even enough time enough generations to really measure a tangible effect.
Well, that's literacy. You know, religion's been around at least 50,000, maybe 100,000 years.
Yeah,
and
but
again,
I mean,
the point is, if Dawkins is saying that nature is a miserly accountant punishing the smallest extravagance, that's enough time.
Now, I mean, evolution works on the order of millions or billions of years. We're not talking about, or, well, maybe not billions, but tens or hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
But they've also found in genetic studies that things can move much faster as well.
Yeah, if they have really short life cycles, they can.
Yeah, but I don't know that you could claim that outside of our willingness to attribute a cause to things that we see, and to sometimes misattribute a cause, I don't think you could argue that there's a genetic basis for religion.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would, but that's not this call.
All right.
Okay.
But the point is, you kind of.
No, I think you know, we try not to spend too much time on one caller, so I just want to say thanks for your call, and we'll talk to you again sometime.
All righty.
Okay.
Bye.
See ya.